Country. I wanted to acknowledge you, Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you again for that introduction. Thank you to our elder, Bertha, for the prayer. And thank you to the Algonquin Nation for allowing us on their territory to conduct this historic gathering. We are here in the spirit of reconciliation and constructive dialogue. May this be the first of many such meetings. I've been asked to speak today on unlocking the potential of First Nations economies. Our people, National Chief, are in a profound period of transition, a period of nation building, nation rebuilding. We are, in fact, making economic progress. It may not be widely known, but the significant economic transformation has already begun. The economists of TD and the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business estimates that the combined income of Aboriginal households, business and government sectors reached $24 billion in 2011, double the 12 billion tally recorded in 2001. In 2016, they estimate the overall economic pie could eclipse $32 billion, or roughly 50% of last year's estimate. If achieved, the total Aboriginal income would be greater than the gross domestic product of Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island combined. This is good news, and we are trending in the right direction. But truth be told, we can and must do much more. Any optimism and progress is overshadowed by the deplorable conditions faced in many of our nations, particularly in the North, where such encouraging growth numbers mean nothing in the face of crippling poverty and desperation. This is totally unacceptable. We need to find ways collectively to ensure that no nation is left out or behind and that all of our peoples are supported. Strengthening First Nations economies will certainly help. It will also strengthen the Canadian economy and provide opportunities not only for our people, but for all Canadians. Canada is emerging out of one of the worst recessions in modern history. We're faring much better than other industrialized economies. When the recession began and governments implemented economic stimulus programs, as you did, Mr. Prime Minister, many of our chiefs reflected that their nation's economies had been in a state of crisis for years and definitely in need of stimulus. One of the biggest stimuluses for us must be governance reform. Societies that govern well simply do better economically, socially, and politically than those that do not. Good governance increases society's chances of meeting the needs of its people and developing long-term sustainable economic development. Within Canada, the structure and institutions for non-Aboriginal government are well established within a sound legal framework. Today, most Canadians just take it for granted the way their economy works and the legal and the political framework that supports it. Contrast that to the governments of the people with whom the chiefs in this room represent. While historically we were, and of course, were self-governing, more recently we have been under federal administrative authority, and our peoples, our lands, and consequently our economies governed separate and apart from non-Aboriginal Canada in accordance with the Indian Act. Neither an appropriate governance framework for First Nations peoples, nor any peoples for that matter. The Indian Act system of government is an impoverished concept of government. Government for us became little more than managing programs and distributing limited resources. The concept of government should be about making laws, resolving disputes, and generating the means to pursue a collective vision. Administering Indian affairs, programs, and services is not self-government. It's not a system that supports economies, nor can it provide a sound investment climate. Thankfully, this is changing, because there are First Nations leaders that have supported and led both sectoral and comprehensive governance initiatives to replace governance under the Indian Act, to create the legal and administrative framework of self-government that other Canadians take for granted, and to establish a sound investment climate. This includes the raising of local revenues and financial management, the building of public infrastructure and facilities, and the raising of capital, and the management of lands and resources, and community planning. Today, there is now general consensus that supporting First Nations developing strong and appropriate governance, or self-government, is simply the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do because Canada's economy and First Nations and our collective futures are all intertwined. If we want to unlock our potential, it is needed. Ironically, while we all may agree we need to move away from the Indian Act towards self-government, we do not need to tell anyone in this room what a challenge it has become. The reality of our post-colonial transition is short of a court saying we have rights over our land and the right to govern ourselves. Our people have to vote to remove Canada from its paternalistic role in our lives. This is because the Indian Act, or because under the Indian Act, we are still wards of the state. Consequently, Canada has a fiduciary responsibility to our people and cannot simply legislate the Indian Act away in favor of recognizing self-government until our people vote in favor of it. Legally challenging, politically diverse, but nevertheless true. No other segment of Canadian society has had to decolonize and then go through a process to establish the basic structures of governance and create the tools for economic and social development. However, we're in a period of change and transition. We're in a period that the National Chief indicates we have Section 35, which is a full box of our rights. We have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and it is now our challenge as First Nations leaders to, and collectively as a government, with government, to translate those into practical benefits on the ground in our communities. While our leaders have advocated and continue to advocate for change, back home on reserves, many of our people are afraid and reluctant to vote yes to self-government. Given the colonial legacy, they simply do not trust their existing band government, nor, if we're being frank, your government for that matter. This is the biggest challenge that we are facing. For change to occur in each of our communities must go through their own processes of empowerment and local transformation. Through healing, rebuilding, capacity development, call it what you may, our colonial period must officially end. As this process of decolonization continues to unfold, we all have a responsibility to support what is essentially basic community development work. We must not add fuel to the fire by trying to circumvent this process. While we are making progress, and as you said, Mr. Prime Minister, your government is making a down payment on our long-term goal of self-government. We must, however, be mindful that this down payment is on the right house. One where we make the choices collectively, where our nations lead the change to uproot the Indian Act tree and knock it over, leading to full self-government. Not a down payment where your government rebuilds our governance for us through federally imposed initiatives. With all due respect, Mr. Prime Minister, on this point, we must ask that you please rethink your government's approach set out in a number of recent bills introduced or proposed affecting our peoples, which seeks to tinker around the edges of the Indian Act in a piecemeal way, with federally imposed solutions to our issues in advance of our nations having first had the opportunity to address core governance. Unfortunately, this attempt to legislate aspects of self-government for us, to put it bluntly, and to say again with all due respect, is an exercise in neo-colonialism, and as history has shown, will not work however well-intentioned. The approach is fraught with legal and political problems at many levels. The process of change has to be led by our peoples to be legitimate. There is a need, however, for federal legislation led by our First Nations. legislation developed jointly with our nations. Not least, we need governance recognition legislation so that when a nation is ready, willing, and able, and as directed by our people, there is an efficient mechanism so it can move away from the Indian Act and establish core institutions of governance without the federal government acting as gatekeeper and without the interminable negotiations that take years to conclude. This is the foundational work that we need to undertake. This is the foundational work that we need to reaffirm. Determining who are the citizens of our nations, how we select our governing bodies, how we make the laws, and how our governments are accountable to our people. This is really the starting point to all other governance reform, including creating legal and administrative framework to support economic development. Recognition legislation to achieve this goal is not a new idea, but perhaps it's an idea whose time has come. It was recommended, as the National Chief said, in the Penner Committee on Self-Government and the Royal Commission. It has been supported by our chiefs. Frankly, it just makes good sense. This will get at the roots of the Indian Act tree. We need core governance reform. When we do, the Indian Act tree will topple over. No gaping hole, Mr. Prime Minister, but strong and self-determining First Nations. However, to move our governance agenda forward, it will take leadership by you and by us. We cannot simply say it is too difficult or too big. If we are truly serious about economic and social development and the advancement of our peoples, it will take also financial resources. Resources that can come from our nations, having fair access to lands and resources, and revenue sharing with the provinces. There will also be a need to be new investments by your government. We know your government rejected the Kelowna Accord, but it is at that level of investment that is needed. Well planned out.
All right, we're just Ms. Jodi Wilson-Raybould, who I believe is the AFN Regional Chief for BC, is just wrapping up her speech. We're here